Greetings, my scattered brothers and sisters in the Lord. Trust you know the Lord is with you wherever you find yourself scattered today, and that you know that his presence with you is more than enough for whatever you might face today. We're still in Mark chapter 9. I'm still thinking about the conversation of Jesus with the boy's father as Jesus cast out that unclean spirit and healed the boy. And you'll remember that Jesus said that, all things are possible to the one who believes. And the father said, I believe, help my unbelief. And then Jesus cast out the unclean spirit and told him not to enter the boy again. And the boy looked like he was dead. He shrieked, the spirit convulsed him, and then it left him. And his body looked like a corpse. And then Jesus took him by the hand and raised him, and he was resurrected to a new life. And so we're picking it up there, and I'm in Mark chapter 9 at verse 26. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, the boy, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and raised him to his feet, and he arose. He resurrected. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? Jesus replied, this kind can come out only by prayer. Now, there's a lot here I've been thinking about. When we think about the conversation, it's easy to kind of think that, all things are possible to him who believes. I believe, help my unbelief. The disciples, why couldn't we drive it out? They had tried. They thought they were going to be able to drive it out. And Jesus says this kind can only come out by prayer. And some translations even say prayer and fasting. And it sounds like the issue is, not enough faith, that they just need to believe harder. The dad needed to believe harder. The disciples needed to believe harder. They needed to log more time in prayer. It's like they just needed to do more, believe harder. And that's why they couldn't drive this unclean spirit out of the boy to where the boy was healed. I'm not sure I'm real comfortable with that. I think in terms of this kind of larger context that we're trying to read in, this section of the Gospel of Mark is all about the cross. I believe, help my unbelief. Peter, you're the Christ. I believe that. Jesus teaches him that he's going to have to go to the cross, and Peter doesn't believe that. And Peter rebukes Jesus, and then Jesus starts to teach the cross of discipleship. And after this episode, we're going to see where Jesus starts to teach the cross again. And so I hear all of this in terms of, I believe, help my unbelief. Not just that dad needs to believe harder, but this is where all the disciples are at, that they believe that Jesus is the Christ, but they don't believe, they have an incredibly hard time believing that Jesus' kingdom, that salvation is going to come through Jesus going to the cross. And then the call of discipleship, that if anyone's going to come after me, they need to take up their cross, deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. That the way to participate in the kingdom is through taking up our cross and following Jesus. And it's kind of relinquishing our life, dying with Jesus in order to receive life. And I think about this boy, he looked dead. And yet Jesus took him by the hand and raised him, and he received a new life. And I think that that's kind of discipleship in a way, that when we come to Jesus, it is a death. Paul says that when we're baptized, we are baptized into the death of Jesus. And so in some ways, the healing of this boy, it models for me what discipleship looks like, that it's going to look like we let go. It's going to look like we die with Christ, only to receive a new life from Christ. And that's the only way to receive that new life is through denying ourselves and surrender. And so I think we struggle there in terms of belief. Like, I believe, Jesus, that you're the giver of new life, but really, I'm going to have to surrender. I'm going to have to die. I'm going to have to totally trust you to receive this new life. And when we do, we actually discover that Jesus takes us by the hand and raises us and gives us a new life. And then I think about the disciples, and why couldn't we do this? Why couldn't we drive it out? And Jesus says this kind comes out only through much prayer. In the Gospel of Mark, I think there are 3 times where we see Jesus praying. One is after his baptism. He goes into the wilderness for 40 days and he's tempted there, and no doubt a time of prayer. And I think it's about his mission. And when we look at Matthew and Luke, the temptations all have to do with Jesus' mission of going to the cross. Jesus prays again by himself after the feeding of the 5,000. He sends the disciples across the lake. Jesus goes up the mountain to pray. And from the Gospel of John, we realize that the people wanted to make Jesus king, and he's getting away from them and he's going to pray. I think he's probably praying about the cross. I think he's probably praying about his mission. And then on the other side of this, as Jesus is about to be arrested, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's been teaching his cross, he's gone to Jerusalem, and now he's at prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's praying about the cross. You know, Father, if it's possible, take this from me. I don't want to have to go through with this, but not my will, but your will be done. And so it seems like whenever Jesus is at prayer in the Gospel of Mark, what Jesus is especially praying about is his mission of the cross and accepting that mission and not being deterred or deceived away from completing that mission. And I suspect that when he tells the disciples this kind only comes out through prayer, it's not about you got to log more prayer hours. It's about prayer of surrendering to the Father's will, that the kingdom comes through going to the cross, that the kingdom comes through taking up our cross, that the kingdom even comes through suffering that we may not understand. But somehow God is at work in that, bringing his kingdom, his salvation. And, you know, one maybe final piece here in terms of details, all of this at the very beginning of chapter 9 says that this takes place 6 days later, 6 days after Jesus started teaching the cross. And Jesus has taken Peter, James, and John up on the mountain. We have the transfiguration. And then they go down the mountain, and this all happens, and the boy is, you know, cured, made fully human again. And I think, why did Mark tell us that 6 days later detail? Well, you'll remember that humanity was created on day 6. And I wonder if this is a subtle way that Mark is hinting at, that through Jesus going to the cross, and through the cross of discipleship, we are recreated. We become part of the new creation, that we are made new, fully human again, instead of marred and defiled by sin and this fallen world. So I don't know, that's probably too much to think about in terms of a short video, but those are the thoughts kind of running through my mind as I wrestle with these details in this larger context of the teaching of the cross. And just kind of wrapping it up in terms of this episode, I don't know where you might find yourself scattered today, but maybe the issue isn't about believing more or believing harder. Maybe it's simply about trusting. Then I don't need to trust, I don't need to believe harder in terms of Jesus is going to do a miracle, that Jesus is going to, you know, whatever. What I need to do is fully trust him. That seems to me what Jesus had to pray. Not my will, but your will be done. I'm trusting you. And maybe that's the prayer that Peter needed to pray. You know, Jesus, I believe you're the Christ. I don't understand all your teaching, but I'm going to trust you. And maybe that's the prayer Dad had to pray, that I believe, help me overcome my unbelief. Help me to fully trust you. I think that's the key. It's not that we need to pray, quote unquote, more. It's that we need to get to the place to where we fully trust Jesus and that he's bringing his kingdom and his salvation. And he does it in ways that we can't understand, through the cross, through suffering, through rejection, through dying, so that we can receive life from him. And so may God grant us the grace to pray in such a way that we actually come to the place where we fully trust him. God bless. Have a trusting day.